Good morning, everyone. So as promised, I said that I would go ahead and create a kind of like a small series. Well, I didn't really say small series, but an example of how to go about creating the sphere and allow you to kind of see my brush strokes as I go, and how to go about blending and so on and so forth. So since I said I was going to do that, I wanted to go ahead and create a video kind of showing that process. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a small sphere or implied sphere, and I'm just going to leave my palette up here so that you can actually see what I'm going through and how I go about making the strokes and so on and so forth. Okay. All right, so I'm gonna a little space right here, and for this I'm just gonna do a couple of I guess you would say a couple of value studies for the sphere, and then after that I will make one where there is a change of color within the sphere. All right, so I'm going to do one that is I'm just going to make them all fairly small. I'm going to use a smaller brush to kind of give you a sense of what this is. So I'm going to make one that is a value study with the brush strokes going in one direction, and one that is a value study that does kind of vary the brush strokes. And then the last one is just going to be a color study, and I'll make this one, let's say, an analogous with, let's say, from yellow to red or yellow to orange. All right, so real simple. I'm just going to start with the simple little circle, and with that circle I'm just going to create a little bit of an ellipse at the bottom, suggesting the shadow. So I'm just going to, since I'm dealing with a smaller space and not dealing with a much larger space for my brush, then I'm going to start off with a little bit of a smaller brush. So I'm going to today I'm just going to work with my filbert brush, which is a small filbert brush, about a 1/2 inch filbert brush, 1/2 inch to a 1/4 inch filbert brush. All right, so make sure that you have all of your supplies there with you. Have my brush, have my water on the side here. You don't see all those things. I'm going to clean out my brush here, and I'm going to give a little bit of a gradient, a little bit of a ground, I'm sorry, with I need to find a way to kind of hold my palette down. So I'm going to tape my palette down here real quick. So just going to create a little bit of a gray ground, just so, as same thing that we did the last time, where we're just getting a sense of creating a backdrop that the form can exist against. And don't worry about, in this one I'm going to be going with the vertical brush strokes, so I'm not going to really worry about my sphere or painting inside the lines or anything like that. So I'm not going to worry about that as of right now. So when you go through and you're attempting to blend and create value gradients between lights and darks, if you want to see how basically going through and just picking up a little bit of a darker value, a little bit easier to create a sense of a darker value and then create light. Alright, so I'm just going to be using all of my simple brush strokes. I'm going to create a sense of the shadow there. As the shadow leaves out, it begins to fade into the light a little bit more. Alright, so quick and easy. If this was a larger, as we've been working with the larger pieces of poster board, if this is a larger piece of poster board, then most definitely you would be using much larger brush strokes, but the methods are still going to be the same. So I'm just going to blend a little bit of my values on my palette, and I'm going to be looking for ranges of lights and darks. All right, And the colors will begin to blend as you kind of move down into the actual sphere. As long as the pigments are still wet, then they'll blend. All right. So here's where you start actually using your eyes. Okay. If we have a sense of a light coming from the left, and we're creating a dark value on the right hand side, or the shadow, then we're going to then create a sense of that light in the upper left hand corner. And as long as your pigment is still wet, then you will see that it will start to blend. All right. You don't press down a lot or very hard on the surface. Just press down a little bit, and you'll start to see that those values will begin to blend a little bit more. I'm going to move my camera up a little bit here so that you can see a little bit better. All right. And continuing to create a series of light values here. The more you blend, the more light you put in, the less further down you actually go about blending your sphere there. All right. And doing so, you get a sense of a light value that blends down into a darker value. You can also begin to create a darker value near the bottom here. And as you see, I'm making a very strong line there, but I'm not going to keep that line there. I'm going to go in and pick up a little bit of my lighter value, or my tint value, and just begin to blend that as well. So you can move up or down. You can move from the light into the dark, or the opposite, you can move from the dark into the light. All right, now to make a stronger value, there's a couple of ways that you can look at it. If I'm going to make this look lighter in this area, there's a couple of ways I can do it. I can pick up more white and get to a certain point where I really have a lighter value or a tint here. So that's one method of creating a much stronger contrast in lights and darks. But the other method is, since light and value are relative terms or relative concepts, then the other way that I can do that is to make the area near it darker. So if I come in and I make the area near it darker, then that also does the job of creating a much lighter value just based upon the contrast. And you're still trying your best to use vertical brush strokes. So the more contrast you have, the lighter or darker the object will become. If I darken the area around the object, the lighter the object becomes. If I make the area around it lighter, then the darker the object becomes. So you want to be able to control your sense of value based upon the contrast and based upon the relative lightness or darkness of that object. All right. Okay. And one thing about this, if you do have an area up here that's going to be very dark, then you want to make sure that your shadow mimics that sense of darkness. Clean up my little shadow here. I could actually go with a much smaller brush. But as for right now, this brush does not cause too much of a problem, so I'm staying with this brush. And it is, I guess, small enough to create enough of detail, but large enough not to only deal in detail. All right. Okay. A little bit of a lopsided circle there, so I'm gonna try to clean up my circle a little bit more here. All right, and here's where the brush is becoming a little bit larger than I need to. So this would be a time where you would probably go ahead and move or scale down on your brushes. Going to give me a little bit more detail with a smaller brush. All right, so I'm going to scale down my brush, and I'm going to go with a, let's see, I'm going to go with a much smaller kind of detailed filbert brush. And with this, then, I mean, since it's a much smaller brush, then yeah, I can still go with my vertical brush strokes, but I can actually get into a lot more detail now, as opposed to with that larger brush. And all I'm doing is just picking up a little bit of pigment, and as I pick up the pigment that is actually on the surface is still a little bit wet, so I'm able to blend the pigments easily. Much easier to actually get into a little bit of the detail of the sphere itself. Back up to the top here and start kind of creating a little more of a light value. Just continuing to create a much lighter value at the top left here, mimicking the area where our light source is emanating from or coming from. As we said before, a couple of ways that you can actually create a darker value, or I'm sorry, more contrast. is to either make something lighter or make something darker. So by going back over that darker value and really pushing that further into darkness, you can kind of see how that now begins to create a little more of a light value on the surface of the sphere. Okay, so that is going to be our first one. Little simple exercise there. You can make a little bit more of a darker shadow, cast shadow, just underneath. All right, so that's the first one. I mean, fairly simple, not much to it. We'll go to the next one. The next one we're going to be using same lights and darks value to study. Start off with the same brush, but with this one, I'm not going to worry about my vertical brush strokes. I'm just going to create a simple sort of blending simple brush strokes. So I'm going to start off the same way, a little bit of a ground. And like I said, we're not going to worry as much about the outline of the sphere. The outline of the sphere is really there to kind of give us a sense of where our composition is. So it's really just there to give a sense of where the sphere is, right? Not so much how to create the sphere. We're not going to kind of force our circle to be the only area where we can actually kind of get a sense. I know that my shadow is still in this area. I know my boundary of my sphere is still in this area. So I don't need an outline to go around that. All right, just as up here, the outline that we have, the drawn outline, is still there. It's still a border between what we consider to be on the inside and what's on the outside of it. All right, so the drawing of the circle is really just there to give us an understanding of where the object is in space. Okay, so with this one, it's going to be a little bit faster just due to the fact that it's a little bit easier to create simple brush strokes, but I'll slow my brush strokes down. All right, so this is the form I'm creating, light and dark. I'm gonna put a little bit of water on my brush, no pigment. Since there's pigment here, then what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna start blending some of these pigments into the lighter value. And I'm just gonna, what this is called is just pushing paint. All right, so I'm just kind of pushing the wet pigment around the area. And with this wet pigment, I can also go through and suggest my shadow, my cast shadow. All right, and then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take some of that moisture out of my brush. And since the area is still wet, I'm just gonna start picking up some of that pigment with the brush. And what that does, it kind of creates a sense of your sphere. And since we're not worried about, at this point in time, we're not really worried about all the vertical strokes going, or all the strokes going in one direction. So I can kind of blend around that sphere a little bit in order to get a sense of where the sphere is. All right, so we have most of the information there. So at this point, we can actually go in, pull in some of our white to kind of create the boundary between the light and dark. Since the pigment is wet, it's going to blend a little bit by itself, but you can also come in, pick up a little more pigment, and begin to blend those pigments together. And you go in and you're really just reestablishing where your object is in space. These are large, simple brush strokes. No, I'm not trying to brush my hand out of the little pigment. No, I'm sorry, the little painting here. I don't mind you seeing brush strokes. So you want to be okay with having some of those brush strokes still be seen. And you can see that there's a little bit of a different feel between the top and the bottom. Same thing that we did before. If I have something that is a little bit lighter, then I can create an area around it to give a sense of a darker value. By creating that darker value, it also creates a lighter value in the sphere. You can even make your tabletop. Create a little bit of a darker tabletop if you want to. So you have control over how much light is shown. So I could honestly keep this as dark and as murky as it is right now if I want to where we can kind of get a sense that there's not a lot of light being cast upon the sphere. Or if you would rather get a sense of a little bit of a lighter value, then it's not just the lighter value on the sphere, but also lighter value on the table area here. And then we also have most definitely have the lighter value on the sphere itself. So you have control over how much light is actually being shown, how much light is actually being cast on the actual sphere itself. Okay? And like I said, this one is a little bit easier just due to the fact that you're not challenging yourself with just one type of brush stroke. Let's make sure that we create a sphere as opposed to some sort of strange shape here. You can go as detailed as you want in this. Since I'm not looking at an actual sphere to create the sense of this object, then you can go as far as you want with the detail, or you can actually kind of create just a real simple little form here. And then the last one, what I'm going to do is, and you can see the difference. You can really see, even though I'm painting with the same pigments, I have this pretty much the same process. You can see a difference. There's a difference of, a different feel in both of these. Okay, the bottom one, I'm just gonna clean up my pigments here, and I'm just gonna go with a yellow and red, and I'm gonna use a little bit of white and a little bit of black, but not much at all. All right. And you're not going to be able to see my pigments on here. I'll tell you what. I'll flip the palette, and so that you will be able to see. All right. So I'm going to be using just a red and a blue here, and for my red I'm having a crimson red here, a little bit different than the red that you have that I'm asking you to use, but not so different that it will cause a problem. Still going to be using the white and the black for tint and shade. Then for my yellow, I'm going to be basically just using a cadmium yellow medium hue. And for this one, let's go with I'll go with a round brush this time. Since we hadn't really used the round brush that much, I'll go ahead and start with a round brush. And for this, same as the other, I'm just going to start off with a little bit of a ground just so that we don't start off with completely with white. So I'm just going to blend a little bit of my red and yellow to have a little bit of a warm backdrop or warm ground. Just kind of blending the colors here. Now usually if you're trying to blend colors together, you'd want to use what's called a palette knife so that your brush is not saturated with those pigments, or you're not really getting a true blend of the colors. But if you're actively, like you're going into an active brushing and an active painting, then mixing the pigments with the brush is fine. Okay, so I'm going to and just get a real sense of a thin, almost like a thin glaze of a ground. And on this, I'm not going to be worried about any specific brush strokes or anything as well. Kind of similar to the one up top. You can kind of see how once I go over the darker value up top, you can kind of see how it glazes over that and creates a little bit of a almost like a glazed effect or a translucent effect on that. All right, so I'm going to start off with my red here. Just going to begin creating the figure, which is the sphere. A little sense of a shadow right now. I'm not going to worry as much right now with that. And with this, I'm just going to be building up a bit more of the pigment. I'm going to load my brush there with quite a bit of yellow, because it's going to take a little bit of yellow to kind of create a little bit of a lighter value here. By all means, you can use white. Not a problem at all with using white, as long as you're not trying to paint the white over an area that is already dry and you're blending it in, then you're good. And same with black. You can also use black and blend it in. As long as you're not painting over an object with white or black, then you're okay. What I mean by that, as long as you're not allowing the pigment to dry and then coming back into it and attempting to pretty much put a layer of white or black over it, then you're okay. And all you're really doing is just kind of pushing these two wet pigments in with each other. And you're literally just kind of gradually blending those two pigments together. As you work, you're just going to be conscious of your shadowed area. In relation to your more highlighted area. now here's where kind of the magic comes. I'm just going to use black, and I mean you can use blue, or since we're dealing with an orange at this point in time, you can use blue to kind of create a little bit of a darker value on the outer edges. But I'm just going to use black, and then I'm going to blend that black with red. And by doing so, we get a sense of that sphere. A little bit more here. Just as in the others, we had a bit of a value change, and we're able to create a light or a dark based upon the change in value. And when we're talking about value, we're talking about tints and shades, lights and darks. A little bit of white here. You never want to go just with your tint as being white, or just with your shade as being black. You want to begin to blend those colors in, those values in with the colors. So I'm not just going to put white over the orange and reds that I just sort of established. I'm just going to begin blending that white in with the orange and red and yellow. I'm not attempting to cover, I'm attempting to blend. So I don't want that white to be an opaque white over the color that's already been established. You're just using that white to tint the color. You still want to recognize that color as being established, an established color in the little composition that you're making here. Okay, all right, so there are the 3 little exercises, and hopefully this will help out anybody that might need a little bit of work or a little bit of help on those sort of methods that we were using in this last assignment. All right, I will be seeing you all in a little bit, so we'll see you on I think Monday of next week. All right, take care.